Okay, so I just wanted to pop on here and do a live video because there is something that's been really irritating me over the last few weeks, and it seems to be getting worse, which is what's irritating me. It's not like it's just a very small little thing, say a comment or two, and then it's passed. So you'll obviously know this from the title. It's about Greta Thunberg. And she's the autistic 16-year-old who is currently talking a lot about climate change and trying to get people to take action on climate change rather than just make policies and promises and not take any action. So, like many of us, I became aware of Greta Thunberg back last year when she in August 2018 decided to strike rather than attend school on certain days of the week. I think it was like every Friday or something. She went and did a strike, and obviously that started gaining attention. People saying that she should be in school, that she should be focusing on her education, she shouldn't be striking. And myself, and I'm sure many others at the time, thought, well, no, people strike off work, and I didn't understand why. That's part of education, is standing up for what you believe in, and that it's something that should be supported. Now, if she was missing lots and lots of school and just kind of endlessly striking, then obviously there would come a point where you think, well, you need to be getting your education as well. But she wasn't doing that. She was striking. This trying to recall back to August last year. She was striking. I can't remember if she striked for a big period of time as well, but it wasn't for like her whole school. And to me, that seemed perfectly fine. I could understand why she would be striking, but I could also understand why that got media attention initially in Sweden, and then obviously that came from Sweden to because we've got social media and all this kind of stuff. News travels much faster, and so obviously over here in the UK, I became aware of it as well. And then because of her standing up for what she believes in, she did a TED talk in, I think, November, December, something like that, in 2018. And she spoke about what she had done at that TED talk. And obviously, there's other bits and pieces that have been done, news articles and things in the meantime. So it's not like she suddenly sprung up out the blue and not been around, then all of a sudden is being used like a pawn in some game by people. And that's not to say there aren't people with agendas who are taking advantage of the situation. As an autistic person, I have often pointed out that I'm happy for others to get rich off the back of me if they can do things I can't do and help me to, say, have a platform or whatever it happens to be. So, in her TED talk, I think at the end of last year, she spoke about her situation and about how she'd started at, I think, 8 or something, learning about climate change, learning about global warming, learning about having to be green and to recycle things, all that kind of stuff. And she thought, well, if this is such a big issue, why are people not talking about it? And as she got older, she started to do some research about this, learn a bit more about it, and thought, why are people not talking about this? This is a huge issue. And being autistic, and she kind of, I think, talks about this in the TED talk, being autistic, you think in a very black and white way. So things are all or nothing. And so you think, right, if this is a big issue and it needs to be fixed, fix it. There isn't there isn't a kind of grey area. There is either it's a big issue that needs to be fixed and you fix it, or it isn't an issue and so there's nothing to fix. So if it really is an issue, why isn't it? And it's really this issue that, as climate scientists have spent years and years saying, I'm obsessed with science, and so obviously part of being obsessed with science, I read a lot about things like climate change and different stuff about the research. So it's relatively uncontroversial, the fact that there is a big impact on climate change caused by mankind. That doesn't mean that's the only thing. And obviously, models have improved as computer power has improved over the years and got more accurate. So, and things, obviously, the environment is also always fluctuating. It's not an exact science. It's not like you can say on December 31st, 2072, the world will end because of climate change or something stupid like that. But people over the years obviously have made, I think this is part of the problem, have made predictions and said, by the year 2000, sea levels are going to have risen to this height. And then it hasn't happened. And then as you approach the year 2000, people are saying by the year 2020, this is going to happen. And then that probably hasn't happened. I doubt that some of the predictions made, like in the year 2000 about 2020, are going to have come true. But what you can see, even if the predictions are wrong, is that the data shows there is this trend that is very significant since the Industrial Revolution. So even though people's model, it's a bit like predicting the weather. You can say roughly what the weather's likely to be at any given time of the year, but you're going to be wrong as well as right. So you can be roughly right. You can say in the winter it's going to be cold, but then it could be that sometimes it's warmer in the winter and not as cold as maybe you were expecting it. Or you could say it's going to rain, say in January, but then you might have a January where actually it doesn't end up raining because something changed that. So these things aren't exact sciences, but that doesn't, just because you get a prediction wrong, doesn't mean that the general trend is wrong and that the information is wrong. It just means that you haven't been accurate in trying to work out where it might go, because there's so many variables. So it seems odd whenever I do hear someone say, well, man-made climate change is a made-up thing, or whatever rubbish someone might say like that, because that part is relatively established. What isn't so established is trying to tally that with natural variations in things like solar cycles and in natural cycles of weather, and how climate naturally changes over time. There's so much to consider, and so that's where the sort of controversy lies, is like, how quickly are we affecting the climate, things like that. So I don't see what she's talking about as being remotely controversial, which is why it's really odd when people suddenly start attacking her and saying she's a pawn in a game because of what she's talking about. So what I wanted to talk about here on this video is, obviously, she's receiving all this hate. She's had people, there was, what kind of made me decide I've got to make a video, is that I'm getting more and more angry about the way that I see this poor girl, just an ordinary 16-year-old girl, get treated, and the reaction to her that seems disproportionate. It's not like someone saying she irritates me or something like that. It's disproportionate kind of hatred that seems to be directed at her, and bizarre conclusions around things to do with her. So for a while, I didn't really pay much attention. And then all of a sudden, I'm scrolling through Twitter and I see that one media person has suddenly done an attack on her. And then I'm scrolling through Instagram and I see someone has drawn a picture of her. Someone I follow has drawn a picture of her. And many of the comments that I kept seeing under that picture were things like, I'm unfollowing you because you drew her. She's just a pawn in a game. She doesn't know what she's talking about. She needs to be in school. There was lots of attacking on her about different things, about saying, well, she's obviously just acting, and if she knew her subject, then she wouldn't be reading from a script, and all this rubbish. And then I saw it coming up on Facebook, and whatever social media I was going to, I would just suddenly see all this hate coming up on my social media towards this girl and towards what she's doing, when none of that made any sense to me, because I'm thinking, she's literally, people should be proud of her, thinking, I'm proud of the fact that this young girl has decided that, despite it being an incredibly scary and difficult thing to do, that it's so important. As she even says, it's so important. Things are black and white. It's so important. Why are we not all obsessively talking about it and trying to fix this issue. Because if it is that important and it is real, that is what you would expect of humanity. And that's the way an autistic mind generally kind of works, is you have a very black and white attitude towards things. So either this is an issue, so we need to fix it, or this isn't an issue, so we don't need to fix it. And given that the science is saying it's an issue, then you think, well, why are we not fixing it? And given that it's not just a little issue, it's an issue that is actually, scientists say, whether they get their exact dates right or whatever, the exact time when this is going to happen, scientists do point out that ultimately we are the sort of cause of the latest mass extinction event, humanity is. That's kind of pretty much common accepted science. We are leaving our mark on the entire planet because of the environmental changes that we're creating. And so either we are doing these things like scientists say, and scientists should be respected and listened to. And science obviously is about trying to understand the world. It's done peer reviewed, so it's not just one person saying something and making a claim. This is also something that, as has been raised by Greta and by others, really scientists and the adults should be the ones talking about this. So she said in, I think, her recent speech to the UN that her childhood has been stolen because of this whole situation. And I know some people seem to, for some reason, get their backs up by that. But what she was saying was, look, I'm here talking to all of you lot, all you leaders and all you people who are supposed to be dealing with this issue. I'm a child. I should be back at home, enjoying my life, going to school and having a normal childhood. I shouldn't need to be here telling you as the adults what you have to do. So that's what she's referring to as, you've stolen my childhood and childhood of others. It's not saying, woe is me, I'm having a bit of a rough life of it, you've polluted my atmosphere, etc. She's not talking about that parts of it. She's talking about the fact that her childhood is spent doing something, trying to get the adults to do something that adults should just be doing, rather than spending her childhood doing what she should be doing as a 16-year-old girl, which is whatever it is she wants to be doing with maybe friends, family, enjoying her childhood like a normal type of childhood. And yet people have obviously got their backs up about that. But that is a very good, valid point. Why should the children of today be the ones who are rising up saying, hang on a minute, you're wrecking my world, the world that I have to live in the future. You're making it so it's going to be more expensive for me. Yeah, on the one hand, we want children to learn about politics and about science, and we want children to learn about how things work. And then on the other hand, when they do learn about these things, and then they suddenly come to that realization of, hang on, if what I'm being taught is true, why are you not fixing it? Now, you imagine, now I remember this I'm in my 40s now, but I remember this from back in the 1990s when I was in school, learning about climate change. And I was obsessed with sharks and whales and with the ocean and with wanting, obviously, the future to be green and good. And I didn't know that there wasn't things like the internet back then. So I didn't know anywhere near as much as I've learned since being that kind of age. But you learn that kind of stuff and your logic tells you, well, if this is a big issue, why are we not fixing it? That's like someone having a broken arm and knowing they've got a broken arm, but saying, oh, I've got a broken arm, it's going to get infected, it's going to go really bad if I don't do something about it, but I'm just going to go off and do something entirely different for now. You think, well, no, if you've got a broken arm and it's really that bad, go and sort it. Don't faff around and start focusing on other things. Either it's bad and you need to fix it, or it isn't bad and you don't want to fix it. And I know one comment that Greta made that I think is another thing that got people's backs up, was about how she said, you adults, you people in this room here, uh, say that you understand the situation, you understand about climate change, etc., and you say that it's a matter of urgency, that there is a climate change emergency. This needs to be addressed and dealt with, and we need to have targets, and we need to keep carbon emissions lower, and we need to um, slow down the rate of global warming, etc. And yet you're not taking action. You're not treating it with the urgency you claim it has. And so obviously she then concluded, as any logical person would, as I would, that if you're failing to act when you claim that you know this is an emergency and you claim that you understand the situation and the severity of this, if you're failing to act, then the only conclusion you can make is that you must be evil. Because to know that you're committing harm and you're doing that with willful knowledge, you have to be evil to be doing that. So she makes that very logical, as an autistic person would, a very logical solution, a very logical kind of conclusion to the evidence presented. In the same way that I don't drive a car, and one of my reasons for being a non-driver is that it totally baffles my brain. I can't figure out why here in the UK, a pedestrian who perhaps gets to a pedestrian crossing doesn't press the button, doesn't wait for the green man to appear, but instead decides, I'm going to walk straight across this road in front of the traffic. It totally baffles my brain that that pedestrian who's willfully chosen to walk in front of traffic has right of way versus a car which is doing what the driver is allowed to do, which is driving along the road. The driver is in the right place. So it totally baffles my brain that the driver would be expected to brake and stop to avoid hitting the pedestrian when the pedestrian willfully walked into the road. The pedestrian, if a pedestrian willfully walks into a road when it's not their time to do so, then they must have accepted that they may well get hit by a vehicle, may well get seriously injured or killed. And they must have accepted they're comfortable with that idea. Because if they didn't like the idea that they could get hit and injured or killed, they wouldn't step into the road. No logical, sensible, sane human being would think, I could walk in front of the traffic, I could get hit and killed, but I'm going to do it anyway, but I'm not happy with that outcome. That would just be illogical. So my view is that if you're a car driver, why would you not just keep driving like normal and let the pedestrian bounce off your bonnet and just carry on driving as if nothing has happened? Because the pedestrian is the one who chose that, they were happy with that as a potential outcome for them. Because if they weren't happy with that, they would have stayed on the pavement. You don't step in the road knowing that you might get hit and killed if you don't want that as being a possible thing that could happen. So I would not do that. I would stop at a crossing, press the button, wait until the green person's showing, and then I would cross. Because I'm not happy with the idea of walking in front of traffic where I might get hit by a vehicle, potentially injured or killed. So obviously accidents sometimes happen, but when someone is willfully doing it, in my brain, it is totally illogical to conclude anything other than the fact that that human being who chose to walk into the road at a time when they shouldn't be in the road was saying, you know what, I accept that I may get hit and killed here, and I'm perfectly fine with that as an outcome. And to me, that's the same kind of thing here, that the logic is, I'm fine with, I know that there's a climate emergency. I know that we need to do something, but it costs money and I'd rather make money and whatever the excuse is. And so I know this is going to destroy the planet for the future. but I'm okay in my lifetime. I don't care about the future. That, if you're doing that, you are evil. If you're, that is, I can understand her conclusion that if your mindset is, I am okay, I would rather my child has a horrible future as long as I have the future I want. I don't care about my child's future. And that is how she seems to be seeing it. That is how my brain tells me logically that you would conclude that outcome. And so it's odd that people have an issue with her for concluding a very logical, very sensible kind of conclusion that if people don't want to be thought of as evil, do different behavior, take the action that needs to be taken. Now, I'm sort of talking about, I'm not, it's not about me being on my high horse about saying, well, I have to be green and I have to now turn into a vegan. I am part of the problem. I eat meat, and I know the impact that has on the environment. So I am part of the problem. But I'm not attacking Greta for her having her opinions and saying, how dare she say that we're evil or whatever. I feel that it's terrible that I go for the lazy option of just going to the shop and buying the sort of food I buy. And I hate cooking and I hate um, kind of doing food shopping and I hate all these things. So I just go, let's do the simple solution, even though I know that's bad for the environment. So I am part of the problem. But that doesn't mean that I should attack someone for having their opinion when I agree with their opinion. So people have been saying that she's being weaponized, and it's really odd, really aggressive speech talking about things like, Greta Thunberg is being weaponized, when actually people may well be benefiting from her. As I say, people are around me. I think, well, I'm sure you'll benefit from me giving me that platform, or you'll benefit from me being in this situation. That's kind of, people are like that. People want to know what's in it for them. But from her perspective, she's getting a platform. She's getting to take action. She's getting to try and say, look, all of you lot who are actually in the positions, she's not in a position of being able to make policy changes or being able to do some of the action that needs to be done. But she's able to say, look, myself and all my generation, we don't want you lot above us messing the whole world up for us because you said, oh, there's 100% a problem here, but we're not going to take any action. We'll leave it till the next lot. And so people may say, well, she's being used, but she is choosing what she's choosing to do. She's choosing to stand out, have a say. And people have criticized her. I saw one thing saying, well, she's obviously just a bad actress and she's faking it all and she's got these fake emotions. Well, I know autistically, I really, really struggle with emotions. But as she said, and as I would say, you have a very black and white response to things. And that goes for emotions as well. I'm either perfectly calm and okay, or I'm raging. I struggle with the kind of, I'm starting to get irritated and all those weird in between bits. It's all or nothing. The same with all different emotions. So I can be watching something, sat perfectly calmly, and then I'm bawling my eyes out because I found something so emotional. And my wife will often comment on that, the fact that I'm suddenly bawling my eyes out at something and she's not finding it particularly emotional at all. But I have found it deeply emotional to the extent that it's completely overwhelmed me. I've had sensory overwhelm from those emotions because autistic people do. Autistic people aren't non-emotional. Autistic people are often over emotional and oversensitive to feelings of emotion. So you get a little bit of irritation and you'll feel it as, I want to throw the computer across the room. I want to smash this up. I'm really, really fuming and angry now. you feel kind of, oh, that's sad, but you really trying not to cry because you've become overwhelmed with sadness. And so when I've watched Greta talk, I've thought, well, yeah, that looks familiar. That resonates with me. That looks like familiar kinds of behavior that you're suddenly talking about something and trying not to, you know, you're trying to sort of express that emotion, but you're doing it in your way. So I've had people say to me, oh, you don't express emotion correctly. You don't express this correctly, that correctly. Like when I've had relationship breakups or people in my life dying, and this is obviously one of the reasons why I wrote my Autistic Perspective, Death, Dying and Loss book, because I was sick and tired of people saying to me that I had emotions all wrong, that I wasn't expressing emotions as I was supposed to be expressing emotions, that I wasn't expressing sadness as I was supposed to be. And yet, what would happen is I would go from, say, when my granddad died, I'd talk about my granddad and I'd be bawling my eyes out. And a fraction of a second later, say my phone goes, I'd answer my phone and I'm 100% perfectly fine. I'm not sad anymore because my attention is now on something other than the emotions associated with my granddad. And then I'm back to thinking about my granddad and I'll be bawling my eyes out again. And so people then say, well, you're not emotionally reacting correctly. And yet, as an autistic individual, that is how I react emotionally. And so everything I've seen of Greta just looks like an ordinary autistic individual who is passionate about a subject. As yeah, it's relatively common knowledge that autistic people get hooked on a subject, or very easily get hooked on subjects where they then deep dive into the subject. They literally learn everything there is to know about the subject. She's been criticized. I saw a criticism that said, well, it's obviously fake because she read from a script. Well, I give talks all the time. I'm in my 40s and I have bullet pointed notes of things like facts and figures and things that I want to convey, because I know none of that will come to my mind if I don't have it in front of me. Because the way my brain personally works is it just doesn't sort of grasp onto those bits of information when I need them. And so I can say, there is this kind of issue or whatever it happens to be. But if I want to quote exact facts and figures, I just need them written down in front of me. So it seems odd to think that people will accept all these politicians who have their script coming up, scrolling on a screen in front of them. They'll accept scientists giving talks where they have things scrolling up on a screen in front of them on a PowerPoint or something. And yet a 16-year-old girl has some notes on some paper that she's written down about how she feels about things, about some of the facts around climate change. It doesn't take much effort nowadays to have researched everything that she talks about. We've got the internet, you've got Google Scholar, you can go and look at peer-reviewed articles. You can see that things have been peer-reviewed and know what's legitimate versus what's just like someone's website where they're making claims, but they don't actually link to any sort of accepted science. So we can do all that. I didn't have that kind of access when I was young. I remember when I was I went to two primary schools. First primary school, I was there till I was about 8 or 7. Yeah, I was there till I was 7. Then we moved home, and so I had to go to another primary school. And the other primary school was in a really small town. They had a really, really small library. I remember going into the library. In my previous primary school, I'd read every single book that was available for me to read before I left that primary school. My reading age was well ahead of my chronological age. When I went to the second primary school, it was a very, very small primary school in a small town. I had essentially relatively quickly done the same. I'd absorbed all this information. I just read every book I can get my hands on. I was then given a library ticket, a library card. So I went to the library, and it didn't take long to get through all the books in the kids' library section. And I remember the adults telling me I cannot go in the adult library. And yet I could see through from the kids' library to the adult library that there was vast amounts of books, far more than in the kids' library. And I said, I want to read those books. And I remember this when I was 8. people saying, no, you're not allowed. That's for adults to read, not for children to read. And I remember being really angry about this. And then I had an uncle who bought me an level science book. And I remember my mum saying at the time, "Oh, I think I was sort of 8 or whatever. Oh, I think that's a bit too advanced for him. Maybe you want to get him something different." And I remember taking that book and reading it and absorbing it and finding it fascinating, and thinking, "Why is this not being taught in my primary school? Why am I not learning? This is my first introduction to science." Thinking, "Why am I not learning all this stuff? Why are they not teaching chemistry, physics, biology? Why do they not teach all this stuff in primary school?" And so I read that book and started reading even more science books, and never managed to get into the adult section of that specific library because they would never let me. But it was accepted within my family. It was accepted. Yes, Dan does seem to like science, and he does seem to like learning sort of knowledge and more advanced stuff. And so I started being bought more books on sciences. And I remember my first year in, no, I remember, I don't know what year it was, some year during secondary school in science, where I had answered, I think it was the year before starting GCSEs, and they're sort of looking at what level science class to put you in to depend on what type of science GCSE you're going to end up doing or something like that. And one of the questions on a test towards the end of year 8 or whatever it happened to be was, what is gravity? And I talked about the warping of space and time, etc. And when I got my test paper back, it said that it was wrong. My answer was wrong. And so I asked the teacher, why is my answer wrong? Gravity is the warping of space and time, etc., etc. And they said, no, that's wrong. That's not what the answer is for that answer for that test. It's the attraction of two bodies and the answer that was given. And I said, but that answer is wrong. And so I got out a book and showed that my answer was correct. And the science teacher said, yes, you are correct. That answer is correct. But the answer isn't correct on that test, on that paper. The answer you've given is the answer you would give if you did A-level science or higher. That's not the answer you would give when you end up doing your GCSE science. And I remember thinking, well, does physics change between GCSE and A-level? Because physics can't change. Physics is physics. Our kind of understanding of things can change and evolve, but it doesn't change between one test and another. It changes as we learn more about the natural world. And so that pointed out to me as a teenager how stupid things can be. You can have an answer that is correct, but it's wrong on the paper that you're taking because it's too advanced for the paper you're taking. And so it seems like, I was younger than 16 then. And so it seems odd that people say, she should be in school, she should be getting an education, she needs to be educating herself on this stuff. She shouldn't be talking about this kind of stuff. It's stuff that's for climate scientists to talk about. It's stuff that scientists should be talking about. She would agree, scientists should be talking about all this, but then people should be listening to the scientists and taking action. And so because that's not what's happening, she's there thinking, well, I should be in school and I should be enjoying my life, doing whatever I do with my life. I shouldn't be having to be out here doing all this. And yet here she is having to be out doing all of this stuff. So she has commented about how she views things very black and white, that she has that kind of, because of being autistic, things are black and white. She has talked about how she doesn't play the usual social games. You come out and you just bluntly talk to people and tell people what you think. You don't really beat around the bush and lie. It's not to say autistic people never lie, but autistic people are generally not the greatest liars because that requires multiple levels of communication, and that starts getting really overwhelming and difficult to do. So it's not saying everyone can't do it, but it is a very challenging thing to do. Whereas in everyday life, I get on so much better with animals compared to how I get on with human beings, because animals are honest with you. Human beings have multi-level communication. You ask, you suspect that maybe they're not okay. You say to them, "Are you okay?" And they say yes. And you think, but looking at you, it looks like you're not, and yet you're saying you are. So do I believe you when you say you are, or do I believe your non-verbal behavior that seems to be communicating to me that you're not? What is the real answer? So humans do that weird thing of, you don't just bluntly tell people the truth. You don't just, if you're sad, you don't just say, "I am sad." When someone says, "Are you sad?" You don't just agree. You say, "Oh, no, no, I'm fine, I'm fine." I know people have complained about Greta staring at Donald Trump, giving him the evil eyes or whatever. Again, it's odd that that's a complaint, because wouldn't any of us be the same if we had strong feelings towards someone? I have had managers, for example, and work colleagues who have said things to me like, "Oh, when I'm around you, you blank me, you don't talk to me, etc., etc." And I will say to them honestly, "Well, I don't like you. I don't like the way you behave. I don't like the way you act around people. I don't like the way you treat people. So obviously, I'm going to think, keep away from me. I don't want anything to do with you." It's odd to think that, what am I supposed to do in that situation? You don't want to lie and say, "Oh, I'm really sorry, I'm just a bit tired," or I don't know what excuse people would give. So if I don't like Donald Trump, at least not what I know of him based on how he is portrayed. I don't like the fact that in relation to climate change, that he seems to be doing everything he can to kind of pretend it doesn't exist, rather than engaging with everyone and saying, "Look, how can we solve this?" And yet he's one of the most powerful people in the world and could probably do so much good. So in that context, I would be thinking, this message is for you. You need to be the one pulling your finger out and acting on this, not pretending this isn't an issue and letting everyone else try and deal with it. I know that there's been people who've said, "Why is she talking about the Western world being the ones having to make all these changes when the developing world is polluting far more than the Western world is?" And that is 100% true. The developing world is polluting far more than the Western world. And Greta has spoken. Obviously, she can't say everything all in one talk, but if you watch numerous talks of hers, you see that she'll talk about things like, how can we expect all these poorer countries to be able to turn things around when the reason they're using, say, fossil fuels, etc., is because of the fact that they're much poorer, and so they can't do a lot of they don't have the infrastructure for putting in place a lot of the sort of stuff that would be really helpful to do to turn around their climate kind of impact. And so you need to start with the countries that can afford to do something, so that they can then start looking at how they can help other countries to take action and do something as well. So you've got to start somewhere. If you wanted to help people, you need to make sure that you've sorted yourself out first, so that you can say, "Right, I'm sorted, I'm stable. Now I'll come and help you, because I've got a stable base to be able to do that, and I can then be able to, say, share some of my resources with you." So it seems odd again to attack her for that. She's been attacked because of having a monotone voice. I talk very monotone, and I have to struggle really, really hard to try and remind myself to add some variation. She's been attacked for when she goes off script, like when she's giving a talk, she's fine. And then when she is being asked questions and kind of about things, like in an interview with people rather than a planned script, that suddenly she struggles with answers and other people have to step in and answer on her behalf, and she'll have strategies for how to do that. And again, it seems odd to attack her for that when I'm in my 40s and I do exactly the same. I point out to people frequently, I give talks about, say, autism, and people will put their hand up and say, if you're autistic and you struggle with social situations, how can you be giving this talk? And I'll say, this isn't a social situation. This is me talking at you, me telling you stuff that I've prepared how I'm going to say it and what I'm going to say. And it's all around a subject I know so that I'm comfortable talking about it. And nowadays, if you ask me questions, I'm also comfortable with being able to say, I don't know the answer to that. And I'm comfortable with just saying the answer if I do know the answer. Go back 20, 25 years, and that would be different. I might be able to stand and read a script to someone, but if you then started throwing questions at me, I've got to process what you're saying. I've got to try and process the meaning of what you've said. I've got to try and deal with all feeling overwhelmed from everything around me. Rather than just focusing on doing one task, I'm trying to focus on lots of different things at once. I find it overwhelming. Going back to my late 20s, I was running events with my best friend, and we worked really well together. He's incredibly social, outgoing, and very good at engaging people. And we used to joke that it was like, he does all of that, then you will Dan out, Dan does his little piece, and you will Dan away again. Because I would be terrible at interacting on any kind of a social level with anything. I can come and do my piece, my educational piece, say around hypnotherapy or stress management or whatever it happens to be that I'm teaching. But once it gets to then, I've got some more questions for you, Dan. It's like, Graham, you can answer all this, you can do all that. Just wheel me out for the main bit, you do the rest. I'd really, really, really struggle with that. I'd struggle with understanding questions. I'd struggle with, it's the same in job interviews. I've developed strategies on how to handle job interviews, but initially, someone asked questions, thinking, I've no idea what words just came out of your mouth. I don't know what they mean. I don't know what you just said. I don't know what I'm supposed to do. Am I supposed to smile? Who am I supposed to look at? How am I supposed to react to this? So you have to learn strategies for all these different things. And you've got to think, Greta is 16. She hasn't had time to learn all these strategies. So I always point out to people I can appear relatively kind of good at talking to people when I'm giving a talk. But the second you then get me down off the stage and in with the audience, I will either carry on just talking at you, or I will shut up and I won't say a single word. And I'm the sort of person that would sit silently in a corner, won't interact, won't say anything to anyone. And I know one of the comments about Greta was, she's got mental illness, she shouldn't be out doing what she's doing. And I know some people have referred to this thinking that that comment was saying that because she's autistic, that's a mental illness. I'm trying to give the benefit of the doubt and assume that the guy that said it didn't mean that the autism was the mental illness, but was referring to the fact that Greta herself has said that she suffered with depression, selective mutism, and eating disorder. And when she was talking about all that, she has also said that since sort of August last year, since having this meaning in her life, that she didn't really have any friends, people didn't really like her, people didn't relate to her. She's talked about how her life was prior to standing up and having a voice. And so although this guy was saying, she's had these mental illnesses, she's had mental illness, so she shouldn't be, so I'm assuming, as I say, that he's talking about the depression and eating disorders, not about her being autistic. But saying that kind of misses the point, because she herself has said, I was depressed, I had an eating disorder, and now I've got meaning in my life. I've got a purpose, and I'm no longer depressed. I no longer have the eating disorder. So she has said that what's happening with her is a positive, not a negative. And that's obviously the same with any of us. Once you start getting your basic emotional needs met, problems that are linked to those emotional needs start to fade away. And the other one that I've heard people say very, very frequently, and this really irritates me, is, oh, this is just child abuse. That poor girl is being put up there, used as a pawn. She's being made to stand and do all of these talks, and her parents are forcing her to do this, and these people are forcing her to do that, and the establishment is forcing her to do this. When in reality, she is choosing to do all this. I don't see it as child abuse. I see it as child empowerment. Her parents are saying, this is very difficult, but if this is what you want to do, we will support you with that. The establishment are there essentially saying, we'll give you a platform. You know, you've got something you want to say, you're very passionate about this. Your generation is the generation that needs to be heard and listened to and hopefully acknowledged, and then action needs to be taken to say, look, actually, we do want to help future generations. And so they're giving her a platform. So that's child empowerment, not child abuse. So I have worked with, obviously, as many of you who know me know, most of my adult working career has been spent working with children and families. And a large part of that is working with autistic people as well. And so many of them are incredible people who feel that they're not being listened to, that adults around them don't respect and listen to them purely because of their age. And yes, there are some things that, like, you might get someone that says, oh, I'm perfectly okay, I can get into it, as I've had teens say to me, I can get into that car with that person, I'm perfectly safe, I can handle myself. And as an adult, you know they can't. But then you get others who, you know, you work with certain teens and they know vast amounts about subjects that you think, you know, I've had more years of learning stuff than you have, but around that subject, you know so much more than I ever could because I haven't obsessed about that subject. So I think that, you know, we need to give young people more faith, more kind of belief that, you know, they're not stupid. Mum was describing me as being her little scientist from when I was like 4 or 5 years old. So she knew I wasn't stupid. I obviously didn't know huge amounts back then, but relative to what mum saw as the average 4 or 5-year-old, I was learning knowledge-based stuff that was putting me ahead of what, say, my fellow 4 and 5-year-olds were learning. So I just really wanted to, this has been a very long kind of live video in the end, but it is something that has really bugged me over the last few days, especially, that there seems to be this big attack on one 16-year-old girl purely with some of the attacks being, and I'm hoping that this hasn't been a negative thing, hopefully what I've been saying has clarified some bits about someone being autistic and how they interpret the world, like around black and white thinking and around coming across monotone, using a script, all these sort of things. It seems odd that she gets attacked for them when that she's just an autistic teen who is trying to do something good and trying to empower and trying to address something that she has every right to think, hang on a minute, this isn't logical. You're telling us that there's this huge climate emergency and you're not going to do anything. Now imagine how the public would react if scientists said, we've just seen an asteroid, it's heading towards the Earth, it's going to hit in 2045, and we're not going to do anything about it. It is an absolute emergency because it will cause significant harm. We don't yet know exactly where it's going to hit the Earth, but it will hit the Earth and it will cause significant harm to lots of people. It will kill millions. But that's not until 2025. So we're not going to actually do anything about it right now. People would be up in arms. People would be thinking, you say you understand that this is an emergency. You understand how terrible this is and the harm it's going to cause. And yet you're choosing not to do anything to try and address this, even though addressing it earlier, so using the asteroid as an example, sending something to the asteroid that perhaps could, say, put thrusters on one side of the asteroid and just have the thrusters burning, the sooner you get those thrusters on the side of that asteroid and have those thrusters burning, the sooner that asteroid will gradually veer slightly off course. And the sooner you do that, the more off course it's going to be by the time it reaches the date where it would have struck the Earth. So that thrust on a long burn is going to be much easier to do if you do that years in advance. It's going to be much harder to do if you say, oh, we'll leave it to the generation that's around in 2035. We'll let them deal with it. 10 years beforehand, they can fix the problem. And they would now have to have vast amounts of money thrown at the problem, huge thrusters, or finding another kind of technological solution to do something that a previous generation could have done much, much easier had they bothered. And so to me, that's my thinking on it. And that's a different type of example, but that's how I think that Greta sees this is a huge emergency. You all say it's a huge emergency, and yet none of you seem to be bothered to take the action needed to address this urgency. And yet this emergency, and yet the longer this goes on unaddressed or not adequately addressed, the harder it will be for those who end up having to address it to address it. And she's thinking, but that's going to be our generation. So I want you lot to start addressing this now. And I wish more people would be like Greta, stand up for what they believe is right, and obviously non-violently protest and have a voice and say, look, this needs to be sorted right now. And it might just be the world I come from, where I've done family work and I've done lots of therapy over the years, where you have to be assertive with people and you have to say, no, that is an issue. It needs to be tackled. I've dealt with lots of child protection issues where you have to just say to people, no, you need to do this. That is your responsibility. Take action, do it, or else these are the bad consequences. And they'll know the bad consequences, but some people will just not take the action. And you then think, well, what's with you? Why would you not be taking the action? So I'm just wondering if there's anything else I had to say on it. I'm happy to obviously give any comments about this, but I felt that it was just important to also state my views on this, because it has really been bugging me, especially as an autistic person and as someone who has spent most of my working career working with children and families where children go unnoticed and not listened to, not taken seriously, when they've got a lot to contribute. And I think society over recent years seems to have done that a lot, seems to have said, we don't care about the future generations, we only care about ourselves. At least that's the message that gets portrayed. I think as an autistic person, you see things as the actions are the important part. So I couldn't care less if someone says sorry to me or not, because sorry is just a word. It means absolutely nothing at all to me. What I care about is the actions someone chooses to take. Everything for me is about actions people are doing, not about things like random words someone is saying. And so again, that's something else I resonate with when I hear Greta speaking, when I see Greta. I think, you know what, that's exactly how I think about things. And I've had these conversations with my wife where I said, you can so clearly see that, you know, there are certain traits in how she presents that demonstrate her being autistic, like certain ways of sort of logic and certain ways of being very direct, having very black and white viewpoints on things. Everything's all or nothing. It's either this is important, so let's do it, or this isn't important, so let's not do it. There isn't a this is important, but we're not going to do it. That isn't an option. That's, if you take that option, you're being negligent. So again, jumping back to my work with children and families, when I worked in children's homes, it was made very, very clear to us that if you saw something happening, say kids fighting or whatever, and you chose not to act, you are complicit. You can get in trouble for negligence for choosing not to act. The same with working with children and families, like in a social care type of context. By choosing not to take action when you see something that could be abuse, means that you are being complicit in that. You are being negligent. And so there isn't an option where you say, this is an emergency, but I'm not going to do anything. And we all need to learn from that. As I say, I need to as well. I need to do more for the environment, more kind of positive stuff. It would help if I cut down on things like meat consumption. But it's not right to be attacking some young girl in such a horrible way. Especially in countries where we talk about freedom, or people talk about freedom to be able to have free speech and stuff like that, and rather than respecting others and their free speech, people are attacking others for having their free speech. So I was just checking. I'd written a couple of notes down of bits she'd specifically said, just to make sure that if I quoted them, I was going to say them correctly. But anyway, so hopefully everyone who obviously follows my channel is a respectful person. I obviously post about autism and things, so hopefully they're respectful. And I obviously now my channel isn't mainly about autism. It's quite rare that I'm likely to post anything about autism other than in the community tab, because I've made my channel more about stories now, reluctantly. But being autistic, anyone who follows me, I hope, respects the fact that I'm autistic and have my worldview on things and have a certain thinking style and a certain way about things. That obviously comes across in my stories. And I just want people to be more kind of respectful of people like Greta, and to see that half these conspiracy ideas that are being bandied around about her being a pawn, about child abuse, about her being weaponized. No one paid much attention when she first started talking about climate change until she decided to take time off school because of climate change. And that got the press's attention. That wasn't like some conspiracy saying, let's pick this random girl in a random school and then turn her into a climate activist. And so, yeah, so I don't really have, there's other stuff I can think of saying, but I'm not going to. It's already been, I was planning on making a 15-minute video and it's been nearly an hour. So I just wanted to kind of clear up that a lot of what people are focusing on are normal things that you would expect someone who is autistic, there's nothing at all that she does that presents to me as any different to being a normal teen who is knowledgeable about a subject, who presents as an autistic normal teen. So by that, I mean, her thinking style and her wording and her directness and her bluntness about things isn't designed at all, as I see it, to cause offense or harm to anyone. It's literally to say, this is how I see the world and how I see what's going on. And it is very black and white. It is very direct. She's not trying to sugarcoat things and pretend things. And she's just sticking to facts. And then her logical conclusion in relation to the fact that no one seems to be taking action on those facts. So, yeah, that's all I've got to say. And this is obviously a video that's not on a normal upload date. So the next video will be a normal sleep story, which will go live on Tuesday. So I will see you in that video.